Well, does Biden have dementia? You'd think so if you saw the live footage that I'm watching from his home church, the one where he used to plot the next moves in the civil rights movement when he wasn't, of course. The one where he was arrested for trying to get near Nelson Mandela, except he wasn't that either. The meltdown of Joe Biden has reached such a critical stage that we now have almost 40,000 people voting on our poll, does Biden have dementia? The 25th Amendment of the US Constitution surely must now kick in. His cabinet must declare that he is not fit to carry out his duties as president, as commander-in-chief of the world's mightiest army, on paper at least. We'll be talking to Bryce Green later in the show about that. But of course, the dilemma for the Democrats is once they get rid of old Joe, they have Kamala Harris waiting next in line. The French elections have come up with quite surprising results. We'll bring them to you in the course of the show. But suffice to say, Marine Le Pen is not going to be the next Prime Minister of France. Neither is my friend Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and definitely neither is the nominee of President Macron. A hung parliament in a huge surge of second-round voting, massive increase in turnout, has produced a hung parliament in France. We'll be talking to the European guru, George Samueli, about that later in the show. But let me start with the British elections. The handover between one cheek and the other cheek has produced a lot of effluent, no doubt. Jackie Smith, seriously, back as a minister in a Labour government, having been forced out of the government and then voted out of the parliament on the back of her expenses scandal, which shocked the nation when she was found as Britain's Home Secretary to have been submitting expense claims for the porn channel in her home. She blamed it on her husband, of course, and it might well have been. But she did say in 2012 that she did not deserve to be in the House of Lords as a result of her conduct as a Member of Parliament. Well, today she's back in the House of Lords and is a minister in your new government, as is little Douglas Alexander, as is Alan Milburn, the erstwhile Trotskyite, who is now back with the brief of continuing, indeed accelerating, the privatization of Britain's National Health Service. The government that is taking shape in front of our eyes is even worse than the worst nightmare of anyone who was speculating about what a Keir Starmer government would look like. It's looking much uglier than your worst expectations. And it's all being done on a completely illegitimate, bogus, hoax parliamentary majority. The Labour Party got 1/3 of the votes in the election, 1/3 of the votes cast. Just 20% of the people eligible to vote. 4 in 5 of those who had a vote last Thursday did not cast it for Keir Starmer's new Labour Party. But with 1/3 of the vote, they have garnered 2/3 of the seats in the House of Commons, making it a rubber stamp assembly of a kind wearily familiar in European history. The leader will decide with his coterie of Blairite advisors, and the Parliament will duly rubber stamp it. The official opposition is no opposition at all. Rishi Sunak, the shoeshine boy, is on his way to California, and the Tories have almost nobody to pick from to be the official leader of the opposition. It's already clear that Nigel Farage, who got 4 million votes but only 5 members of Parliament because of Britain's disastrously disproportionate electoral system. He got more votes than the Liberal Democrats, who've got 71 MPs. Farage got more votes and has 5 MPs, one of those garnered from Labour with just 90 of a majority. He almost paid 1 million votes per member of Parliament, but he's already the leader of the opposition, and he's going large on the disproportionality of this electoral system, which has landed us with this monstrosity of a Labour government. The irony of ironies, the man on whom Keir Starmer heaped excoriation at every turn, insulting at every turn, witch hunting all his supporters, namely Jeremy Corbyn, actually scored far better in his 2 general election campaigns as Labour leader than Keir Starmer has. The man who was changing it to My Labour, the one who was going to broaden its appeal, the one that was going to create an entirely new kind of Labour Party, polled 1 million fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn. His share of the vote in an election in which the entire deep state, the entire mass media, the entire polling industry, everything in his favour, and he got fewer votes than the much insulted, much blackguarded Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, despite every effort made by the worst scoundrels of New Labour's past, Neil Kinnock, the Welsh Windbag and others, trooping up to Islington North to try and defeat Corbyn by fair means and foul, including telling people that, yes, Jeremy is the Labour MP, so vote Labour. The result was a crushing defeat for Keir Starmer and a great victory for Jeremy Corbyn, and I congratulate him on that. Keir Starmer's own vote halved. He got half as many votes as he got the last time he stood in that constituency. Half as many. He got in, of course, but Andrew Feinstein, his redoubtable independent opponent, came second with an outstanding result. As for people like me and people who think like me, the candidates of the Workers' Party of Britain and the independents that we endorsed, many of them did astoundingly well. In the Workers' Party, we polled 210,000 votes, despite a complete media blackout, despite not being in one single opinion poll, despite being invisible to the mass of the electorate throughout the entire election campaign. We scored the biggest left of Labour vote that has ever been achieved in history. 210,000 people voting for the Workers' Party and scores of thousands voting for the independents that we supported. And we came so close in some of the seats. In 2 Birmingham seats, we almost captured rock-solid Labour fortresses from the Labour candidates. The independent Ahmed Yaqub came so close to overhauling the largest Labour majority in the West Midlands, but fell short. I, myself, fell short by 1,500 votes. Say too much about it on legal advice, but multiple legal challenges are now with the relevant isn't able to talk about them. But the end result is that Britain has a government that will not change anything of note. The very first call that Keir Starmer made was to President Biden to assure him that if he's headed to war with Russia, with China, with Iran, with all of them, maybe all of them put together, we will be with him. We will march behind the old man wherever he wants to go. The second call was to Benjamin Netanyahu. Yes, I'm not making that up. Keir Starmer, called Benjamin Netanyahu, and to quote the Prime Minister's official spokesman, he thanked Mr. Netanyahu, thanked him, don't you know, and looked forward to further deepening the relationship between our two countries, Britain and Israel. This despite the mass revolt in the Labour coalition that led to a loss of millions of votes for Labour in the general election, both the people who voted against Labour and those who stayed at home in disgust, oftentimes with nobody to vote for that they could express their feelings. Despite that, Starmer wants to further deepen relations between Britain and Netanyahu's Israel. And he's appointed the son of Sue Gray, the neutral civil servant who was formerly a publican, oddly, in the north of Ireland. Her son, parachuted in to a Labour seat, is now charged with bringing Britain closer to the European Union in defiance of the wishes of the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit at the general election. You couldn't make any of this up. Neither could you make up the state of Joe Biden. He says that he's going on. He took counsel from his most trusted advisor, one Hunter Biden, the crack-smoking, underage sex-practicing felon who's about to go into prison. He persuaded Joe that he must go on and on. And so the Democrats are in a pretty pickle. They were in it anyway. If Joe had agreed to go, they are legally bound to run Kamala Harris as their candidate, a woman even less popular than Joe Biden. And if they were able, by any means, fair means or foul, to persuade both Joe and Kamala to go, Big Mike Obama, Hillary Clinton, and some tailor's dummy in California were waiting in the wings. But none of it will make any difference. Donald Trump is going to win a landslide second term as the President of the United States of America. And he will confront a European alliance where Keir Starmer may be entirely dependable as a transatlantic servant, but the British people are scarcely behind the policy or the personalities that are ruling Britain. He will survey a France where the president is now a lame duck with no ability to get his policies through the National Assembly in France. He will survey a Germany where bonkers Baerbock and little soldier Schulz cannot muster 20% between them. Both parties, SPD and Greens, put together are on less than 20% in the public opinion polls. And he'll face something else. A revolt amongst the leaders of old Europe. Old Europe. Hungary doesn't get much older. Its prime minister has just left Moscow. He's on a one-man peace mission, being assailed, having rotten eggs tossed at him from the commanding heights of the European Union bureaucracy. But as he puts it, Hungary will not go to war with Russia. And despite being members of NATO and the European Union, they will not permit either to go to war with Russia either. And that the time has come for a negotiated end to the Ukrainian conflict, which should never and need never have started in the first place. The truth is, the Slovakian Prime Minister would have been with him if someone hadn't tried to assassinate him and he didn't still have a piece of bullet inside his body. But he has declared that he is there in spirit. Old Europe, which has no intention of going to war and risking the complete incineration, obliteration of the European mainland by a madcap American president, senile, demented American president, a wooden, cardboard, plywood British Prime Minister, a dead or dying French president, a dead or dying German government. They're not going to allow Europe to be destroyed by such people. And Donald Trump probably likes the sound of all of that. He doesn't fancy NATO much, and certainly isn't going to go to war with Russia over which side of a line Kupiansk should lie on when it's been in 4 countries over the last 100 years. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It is the mother of all talk shows.
I always have been and always will be firmly opposed to any changes in the law to allow assisted dying or assisted suicide. I believe the threat to the dependent, the most vulnerable, the most desperate in our society is simply too great, and therefore assisted dying or legalized assisted suicide must never become law in this country. Thank you, George. Thank you very much.
Bravo, I agree entirely, and spoke, I hope powerfully, in Parliament against this euthanasia, legalized murder. I have the most profound feelings of opposition to it, which, as you say, does not mean that the pressures on people who are terminally ill, who have lost hope, are not themselves profound, and that the pressures on people without pay and without any kind of remittance or relief are condemned to years, decades of caring for people who are terminally ill, helpless, hopeless, and so on, that these are not deep, deep mines of anguish and of pain and of doubt. But I have a moral and religious obligation to oppose it. If capitalism was a person and it could kill anyone that it liked, it would kill the one that will never again turn a penny of profit. It's very easy to imagine relatives, even family members, even husbands and wives that would like to see the back of you, either because they think you've suffered long enough or because they'd quite like to see what's in your will and quite like to spend it. I wouldn't trust, and I don't think you should, anybody to decide whether you live or die. As a religious believer, I believe that that is God's job, not yours. This is a subject we'll have to return.
You are listening to the